Okay, excuse me. Maybe we'll start on the top of page 105 tonight and see if we can go into this a little more. So the Master's gone through a series of what are called complementary pairings. Sometimes people see these as opposites or contrasting principles or phenomena. And then on the top, after he explains these various pairings, and again, we talked last time about these are not exhaustive, but a suggestive list of how things are polarized, dichotomized. Then he says to them in the further instructions starting on 105, if you understand and know how to use these 36 complementary pairings, you can string together all the teachings in the sutras, and whether coming or going, you avoid extremes. Use your essential nature in discoursing with others. Outwardly be unattached to appearances while right in the middle of appearances. Inwardly be empty without clinging to emptiness. If you cling to appearances, you will just compound your wrong views. And if you cling to emptiness, you will only magnify your ignorance. So there's quite a bit here, but in a sense what he's doing, there's both a letter and a spirit to this instruction. The letter is the listing of the complementary pairings, and then his teaching is when somebody brings up one, you bring up the other, you contrast them, and then by doing that you neutralize either end, and then the result is a liberating change in the person. The spirit of this goes back to this page 103, and where he says, and then there's no place to set up. So it's actually, the spirit of this is to create that space where people are free from setting up, attaching, grasping, or clinging. Well, I was explaining last week, even getting the letter of this is at best halfway there. In other words, you can think you can just, when somebody brings up a question or a challenge or something, you can just answer with what you think is the opposite, and tra-la, there'll be a liberation. But actually it's not quite that simple, because sometimes it has to be done in a more subtle way, and in order to do that, you have to grasp and internalize the spirit of it. And the spirit of it basically is to break attachments or to unstick. So if you look at what an enlightened being, Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, considered the state of ordinary beings, we're stuck. We're stuck some way. We're hung up on different things. We're hung up on our feelings, on our emotions, on our desires, our fears. We're hung up on our views and our strong opinions. We're hung up on our misunderstanding of the way things are, our desires, and so forth. Whatever it is, we're hung up in the past, we're hung up in the present, we're hung up in the future. We're hung up on materiality, we're hung up on spirituality. We get hung up in 100,000 different ways. Actually, it's 84,000 if I wanted to use the text. All right, sorry, 84,000, that's it. 84, which means, of course, myriad ways. And the purpose of this teaching isn't to impart content. It isn't to impart Dharma, but rather to unstick the person from a position. And the very unsticking itself is the imparting of Dharma, because Dharma is the unsticking medicine. It's the glue release. I don't know what you want to call it. Call it WD-40, okay? Those of you who work with lubricants. Okay, when something's stuck, when the lock is stuck, you put in some graphite or something, and it unsticks and the lock works again. It's the same principle here. So The interesting thing, what happens is, it goes quite profound. Once the unsticking can occur, and this takes very sensitive skill to apply the right ungluing. You can't just blast it with WD-40, because sometimes, sometimes that isn't required. Sometimes it's a slow untying of the knot, and just throwing something at it or hammering at it isn't going to work. And sometimes it has to be staged and not just directly hit. It has to be hit in a couple of different ways for somebody to take it. You can't just say, okay, let go. There has to be a corresponding feeling of joy and liberation that comes with the letting go. And once there's that, you can build and say, well, let go a little more and a little more. And so once that lubricant, if I can, or the loosening, the unsticking starts to happen, two things happen to the individual. One, they naturally then return to the mind ground. They come back to the ground of their own mind, their own nature. And that's the goal of this, is to bring people back to the mind ground, not to seek outside. And the second part is, basically, to bring back to the mind ground is the same as bringing back to what's called the middle way. Coming back to the middle way. In the middle way here, he explains, he's hitting on different ways here, but he says, the middle, appearances and clinging to emptiness. This is another definition of the two extremes to avoid in finding the middle way. And what he's talking about here is the phenomenal appearance of things, our projections and manufacturing, creation of attachments to phenomena, which are called dharmas. The appearance of things as they appear to our desire mind, as they appear to our confused mind. Not as they really are, but as they appear. And they change their appearances based on our attachments and projections. So this is that phenomenal world of dharmas, the 10,000 things arising from this moving mind that is not seeing things as they are, but setting them up and attaching. So when he's saying the middle way is not attaching to appearances, but, and this is critical in this passage, right in the middle of them. So it doesn't mean you shut off your sense organs and say, I don't see, I don't hear, I don't smell, I don't feel, I don't taste, and now no appearances move me. That's not going to work. Unless, you're completely taken care of and on tubes in a room where there's nothing happening. And even that is doubtful whether you go very long. What he's saying is right in the midst of reality, not to be confused by it. So you're in the midst of phenomena, appearances, but you're not caught up in them. This is very difficult to do. How do you remain everywhere engaged and nowhere attached? I can be everywhere engaged, but I get all swept up in it. Or I can be nowhere attached, but I can't be engaged. But one of my students was asking this week, how do you, enter the fire and not get burned, to use an Avatamsaka metaphor? How do you work with the world, work with the things, work with your own inner emotions and feelings, and yet not get turned? So you get depressed or overexcited and so forth, or dejected, or falsely elated. This is what it means to be in the midst of appearances. And not just mean external appearances, it means your own inner world. How do you work in that and not be swept away? So this is one question. And the other part of that is, then he's saying that's part of the thing to avoid. Getting swept up in appearances. But it's not to avoid appearances, it's to be in the middle of those. So the middle way is to be in the midst of those, yet not moved. Then the other one he brings up, he says, inwardly be empty without clinging to emptiness. That's the other side. So there's appearances and there's emptiness. And what he's talking about here is this lifeless emptiness. He's not talking about true emptiness, which is wondrous existence, because that's in the midst of things unattached. What he's talking about is this lifeless emptiness, clinging to emptiness. And that means sort of in an inner world of meditative oblivion. So it's actually a cultivated state. In other words, it feels good in a sense, but it feels good because you blotted out feelings, awareness, consciousness. And he said these are the two extremes. So the middle way sometimes is posed as not attaching to emptiness, not attaching to existence, not attaching to hedonism, not attaching to nihilism. And in this way, it's variations of this theme, not attaching to the appearances while in the midst, and not falling into a lifeless emptiness while still being unattached and letting go. This is the dynamic equilibrium he's talking about. That's the middle way. So the middle way is not some sort of fixed ideological or doctrinal kind of identity, but rather it's this flexible, nimble, constantly responsive, checking and balancing and so forth that avoids these two extremes. Does that kind of make sense? Because sometimes these things are too abstract. It's like, how do I go through the day, staying centered, staying clear, responding appropriately to what's there, and not getting all tied up? You know, getting tied up in a way that I get angry and blow it, or getting tied up when I say, the hell with it, I just stone out. You know? Either way, how do I deal with that? That stoning out, that self-medication thing, is falling into the lifeless emptiness. And the getting agitated, overexcited, pissed off, and whatnot is falling into the appearances. And it's not like, okay, maybe I can just hide in the monastery. You know, if you talk to the monks here, you'll realize, Dad, it's really hard to hide in the monastery. Actually, the heat increases. The appearances and the sway, attraction of appearances increases the more you try to be in the midst of them and not be attached to them. And so does the appeal of that dull emptiness. The doorbell rings, it's like, you answer, no, you answer, I don't want to answer. You know, and then people ring the doorbell again and again. And then somebody who's really into appearances, I'll answer because maybe it's a donor. And either way, even in the monastery, what you have is a reified environment to see how you get caught up in appearances or fall into this emptiness. It ain't easy to escape reality. But the monastery is the last place you want to go to do that. Okay, that was a digression. So here's the letter of this is setting up or pointing out to a person where that stick is. The spirit of it is whatever gets them released from the stickiness, gets them back to the mind ground in the middle way, is this method. And that goes back to his awakening of it's nothing more or less than letting the mind be unattached, clinging to nothing. Walking, standing, sitting, even in sleep, past, present, and future. If you can stay in this mind, you're always in the middle way, you're always on the mind ground, you're always happy, you're always complete. Simple. Class over. So, what I wanted to do tonight was to maybe talk about this and give some perhaps illustrations, because I think it's easy to, you know, read this when somebody somebody brings up darkness, you bring up light. Somebody brings up deep, you bring up shallow. That's the very sort of gross, almost like bold presentation of it. But the actual application of it isn't quite that simple. So I got what I think are some examples from the text, and you can all agree or disagree with me. That'll keep you awake. It's fun to disagree with me. So let me say, I'm going to give what I think are examples in the text where this method is applied, but not quite in the bold terms of black, white, long, short, high, low, but rather in the contrasting of a state with another state that then breaks or unties, okay? So the first one I'm pointing you to, and I'll run through this and see what you all think, is on page 8. Okay, so if you could, and on the bottom of page 8, and I'm going to go in a sort of a sequence. Somebody gave me these. These are cool. You see these? Yeah. You know, I used to fold pages over, and then I get kind of find the fold, but these are really cool because you just stick them on there. And you can even make notes on there. Yeah, anyhow. Yeah. It's a mnemonic device for an aging mind. So on the bottom of page 8, the first time Hui Neng comes in, and he meets the fifth patriarch. And the fifth patriarch says to him, why are you here? Well, you know, what's your reason in coming? And I only came to be a Buddha, he says. And so now a thing comes up, he says, you, how could you be a Buddha? You're just an ordinary person from the South. You're uncultured, you're uncultivated, some people say it's barbarian, but what it really means is not a cultivated, refined individual. And so this is the contrast. You can't be a Buddha because you're this. Now, the way the Sixth Patriarch responds, I think, shows this method. What he brings up is, his answer is, people may come from the north or south, but fundamentally there is no north and south to the Buddha nature. The body of a barbarian and the High Master are not the same. But what difference is in our mind and our nature? So he neutralizes this body-mind dichotomy, or this cultivated, uncultivated. And by doing that, he brings it back to that essential nature again, where all dharmas are level and equal and the same. And now they're back. And so what that does is tells us in our encounters with people, I mean, just on a one level, you say, well, how can you understand the Dharma? You're an American. You're not from Japan or China or India. And the answer would be, yeah, you're right, I'm screwed. No, it's like, then American or Indian, East or West, are false dichotomies. And by contrasting them, emptying them out, you return back to this mind ground. So, one example, but it's subtle. Okay, my next example. Is page 11 and 14. It's the actual verse competition. Okay? And I was trying to think through this from being around my teachers who use this method. I will certify that this is very hard to get. It's easy when you see it done, you go, oh, that was easy. Look what he just did. He just pulled the rug, untied the knot, and then you try it, and it's hack, slash, and nothing loosens. So in this one, I see, again, between these two verses, a dichotomy being posed. On page 11, Shensho presents a verse. It says, body is Bodhi tree, mind a bright mirror. Time and again brush it clean, let no dust alight. So he's setting up a position. When Hui Neng does his verse, he counters with the opposite. He says basically, Bodhi can't have it. There is no Bodhi tree. And then when he says there is a mirror stand, he says there's no mirror. Yeah, opposite, right? And then he says, time and again, brush it clean, let it dust. He says originally, there's not one thing where it could dust a light. So here again is that method being used. And supposedly by doing this, one who was setting up where Shensho was setting up, which is to say, I have my body, and there's a mind. These are things that need to be cultivated, and I will work to brush them clean and let no dust alight on them. And what Hui Neng is doing is moving it to, he's saying, essentially that's a provisional view. That's still a view of a self and an other, an inside and an outside. And he's saying, if I bring these in to challenge these, Bodhi has no tree nor any mirror stand bright. If there's no attachment and there's no seeking, where is there room for dust to settle? It's almost like, and I don't want to, it's not like this, but it's a little like this. My grandmother's expression, she always had these American chung-yus. Stitch in time saves nine, haste makes waste. But I never got those two together. Because, if you're not hasty, you do the stitch in time, you don't say, but never mind. You see, they don't all work. But hers was, a rolling stone gathers no moss. And this image of, if the mind is unattached, clinging to nothing, where can the moss settle? But if you're attached, by metaphor, if you're attached or clinging or seeking, then you create a place for seemingly dust to settle, which is only created by your mind that's seeking, because if there's no place, you get where he is going on this? And so, to me, that's another example. On the other hand, I was having fun, and this is not great, but it's an attempt at saying, But Shensho's verse itself could be a breaking up of attachment to somebody else. So then I'm thinking, well, it's not an either or. You can have a previous setup where Shensho, when they hear Shensho's verse, there's an unsticking and letting go and coming back to something. So my contrast to what's before Shensho, anybody want to guess what I came up with? What would be the previous to Shensho position? Somebody comes in to the monastery, and then Shensho gives this verse, and they go, wow, something opened up here. What position would that be? So I'm thinking of psychological tropes. You got an idea?
Being on your phone all the time.
A little louder.
Being on your phone all the time.
Being on your phone all the time. So that's very interesting, because every time you go this, you're letting dust alight. Every time you hear the bing and respond, you're letting dust alight. That's interesting. Is that what you meant?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. Well, what I was thinking of is more of a contemporary, but also at the time of the Buddha, there was schools of thought or behavior called nihilism. And we have modern equivalents. You could say a sort of postmodern nihilistic set, or what I see increasingly more and more is a reductionism of reducing everything to materiality, so that life and our existence are merely neurons firing in flesh that are controlled by chemicals and so forth. There's nothing after this breaks up, and there's no morality governing this, because it's all pretty much controlled by the sequence of the neurons and so on firing. So I don't know what you'd call it, postmodern, materialistic reductionist. There are people like that, really. I mean, even when you read modern books and say basically religion is just a neuron firing in the brain. And so there's nothing to religious experience except a kind of wiring issue. There's nothing to human choice, because all these things are set in motion by cause and effect of molecules and neurons and whatnot. So there's no free will or any consciousness that could direct, and so on and so forth. You've heard about, right? Okay. So here's my verse. Excuse me if it's not good, but I had fun doing it. So somebody comes in and writes on the monastery wall, who's a postmodern reductionist, says, the body's just a piece of meat. Mind, electricity, and grist. Eat, drink, do whatever you want. None one thing exists. Okay? None of this exists. So here again, body's just a piece of meat, mind, electricity, and grist. Do you know what grist is? Grist is like the gristle, tendons and ligaments. When a dog chews on a bone, they like to get the gristle. So it's like, all that is just a bunch of, elasticity. It's just a blob of meat up there, but grist, okay? With electricity running through it. That's it. That's your consciousness. And then the next thing is, because that's the case, then people say, just do what you want, eat, drink, and break all the rules, because there's no accountability, there's nothing whatsoever, not one thing exists. So then that person comes in and to the monastery. Now, if Hui Neng gives his verse, the postmodern can say, yeah, you're right. There's no Bodhi tree, no mere stand bright, basically not one thing, and it kind of misinterprets that, because that's not the appropriate WD-40 for that person. But Shensho's verse could be, when he says, yeah, but your body's like a Bodhi tree. It has this wonderful possibility, and your mind is like this bright mirror, and if you attend to it and cultivate it and let no dose of light, it will function wonderfully. And so possibly this person goes, never thought of it that way. Never came, and so they would get a spiritual slight, maybe, tendency. Now, if they cultivate it in that way and started to realize that, then at a certain point, Hui Neng's verse could be the unsticker for them. So what I'm saying is, you can't say, this verse is the ultimate, complementary pairing. So whatever the situation is, I'll just go there and say, and somebody says, what's the meaning of life? Basically, Bodhi has no tree, nor any mirror stand bright. Originally is not one thing, where can dust of light? No, there's no release, right? It's not appropriate to the situation. So that's what I'm saying. You can't memorize these lists or these opposites and just think like it's some app and then you just plug in the first line and the second one comes up and tells you what to do. You got to kind of get both the letter, but more importantly, the spirit of this. What's going to work to countervail or unstick at that particular time for that individual? Realizing that too might not be ultimate, but it's in a progression. Because if it doesn't work, it really isn't untying anything, and perhaps worse, ties a deeper knot of loss of faith and doubt that's crippling and doesn't allow a person to move on. So just a kind of take on that. This brought me to the next one. Let's see. Everybody following this? Because I want to use the text to sort of reveal how we, okay. This one is on page 18. Now this one is one of my favorite because I think it's a great movie scene. And this is where Hui Neng, the martial artist general, chases the Sixth Patriarch down, eager for the robe and bowl. He wants the Dharma. And he's in a mindset, physically, mentally, emotionally, that this is something I get. It's given to me. And in this bowl and in this robe is some magical, mystical thing that's going to, like, again, I use this as the ring in the trilogy of Gollum. But whose ring is it? Is it Bilbo or Frodo or who?
That's Gollum who wants the ring.
It's Gollum wants the ring, but who does the ring belong to? Frodo. No.
Frodo. He's the one who carries the ring to the mountain fire and throws it in. Doesn't he?
It's not, let me, that's okay. The point I'm trying to make is the ring is special. Let's not get lost in the forest here, the trees. The ring is special, and whoever possesses it, it conveys, imparts powers to them, right? So wanting the ring is the lust that's brought up. Now, of course, there's a double thing going on because wanting the ring, lust, is rewarded by power, but also darkness. Because when you get the object of your desire and that power, you can see, at least as it's represented in the book and in the movie, there's a darkness, a shadow that comes over the possessor of the ring. Nonetheless, the lust for the ring is there. So in the same way, I would say, Hui Neng is lusting after the ring, the robe and the bowl in his mind, thinking that that conveys the power. So he's set up. Let's say he's stuck here. And what happens in this exchange, first the Sixth Patriarch takes his excitability and counters it with what? I'm just going the contrasting opposite pairs. What does he contrast it with? I mean, this guy's pulsing. His heart is beating. He's sweating. And he's full of that rush energy of the quest, the hunt. So what does the Sixth Patriarch do?
Calm down.
Yeah, he gives him a cup of coffee. No! He calms him down. He counters his state. He says to him, clear your mind and I will teach you. And then Hui Neng quiets down for a long time. So already he's compared and contrasted one with the other. And then he asks him a question. What's your original face, your true nature? And he hears these words, and he has this awakening. Before there's thoughts of good and evil, before there's a stirring of that dichotomy, what's that like? And he has an awakening. However, he then comes back and he says, oh, yeah, but other than those secret words, is there still something more secret? So he's still stuck a little bit. Even though he hears that, the stuck paradigm that he has, which is, you just gave me sort of nothing as a liberating thing, but I want something. And then he says, so is there yet another secret? Is that like secret talk for another secret that you're going to give me? And again, then he unties it one more and he says, There is a secret, but it's with you, not outside. He says, look within yourself. You'll find the secret is with you. And so in this way, he neutralizes a couple of things, but finally he neutralizes a seeking mind that's seeking outside, but doesn't say there's nothing whatsoever. He says the secret is with you. So that way he gets him to return the light to come back to his own mind ground and thus untie another knot. You see? So it's really subtle how this works. The other example I was going to give is on page 39. And this is with this encounter with Prefect Hui. And Prefect Hui is the person who asked about Pure Land practice. And he represents Pure Land practice, as you see on page 39. You often hear monks and nuns and laity reciting Namo Amitabha, hoping to be reborn in the West. And then he says, do they actually get there by reciting the name? So here's a practice that is presented as a Dharma door for awakening. But the prefect is saying, how can just reciting the name result in this? And so the Sixth Patriarch now has to skillfully address Prefect Hui. He wouldn't, I don't think he could, and just say, no, it's a deviant practice, it's not going to lead anywhere, because then the devotion and sincerity that people were bringing to this would be stopped, and they might just fall into a kind of disbelief, iconoclasm. On the other hand, the very fact that he's asking the question indicates that he's partially stuck and partially unstuck, because the doubt he has is a genuine doubt. How can external recitation alone lead to what you're talking about? This liberation of the mind. So the Sixth Patriarch in this case enters and he says, the recitation that you're talking about is an inducement to practice. It's a beginning step to get people to pull away from scattered thoughts and a kind of dissolute life and bring their focus and attention to one thing. But he says, then the next step is to do that in such a single-minded way that the mad mind stops. And when that mad mind stops, that's the mind ground bodhi. So he's presenting it as it's not a right or wrong, but in your state now, the very fact that you're asking this question means get beyond this. Don't sink into some sort of skepticism, oh, the Pure Land's false. No, he says, now go to the next step. Who is this reciting? This Pure Land thing. And then he says, by the way, if your mind is not purified, the Buddha land isn't purified. And there's that line, as a mind is purified, the Buddha land is purified. So then he goes, and he says, well, then people ask, how far away is that Buddha land? So now he's doing this kind of taking the inducement as something literal and then asking, well, how do I get to the Buddha land? Is it 8,000 miles away? Is it 100,000 miles away? And the Sixth Patriarch then enters with the untying thing and saying, it's right now. It's in the here and now. And then again breaks him off of seeking for reward in some future state, like I've invested 100,000 recitations, I've counted them, clickety, 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 click. And now where's my reward? He says, well, counting them clickety, clickety, click is a lot better than what you were doing before. Eat, drink, and be merry and carrying on. But now what you have to do is stop the clickety, click and get the inner clickety, click to stop, which is your mad mind. So then he says, right before your eyes is his Pure Land and so on and so forth. So you know the passage pretty well. Okay. Maybe one more. Oh, the one I forgot. The Bhikshuni, remember her? In the first, when he has his awakening, and oh gosh, where was that? Is it page?
65.
Is it what page, Stacy?
65 is like
Bhikshu Wu Tian, Bhikshuni Wu Tian. It's where it all began, right? Yeah, where is she?
She's in 65.
65, that late? Let's see. What did I mark? Yes, thank you. Okay, so then, do you all remember this, by the way, or not? I mean, we've been through the text. Is this ringing a bell, this particular encounter? Early on, he goes, and this nun comes up to him, and she's reciting the Mahaparinirvana Sutra. And she's a little confused about some of the passage, and some of the words. And she asked, and she heard that he is a great master. So then she says to him, could you explain this to her? And he says, in return, I cannot read words, please ask about the meaning. So right away, he's already hitting on, she's looking at words. And he says, I mean, she's really scholarly and studious, and she's really investigating this text. It could be her PhD she's working on. And I can't quite get the meaning. Could you help me hermeneutically interpret this? And he says, I don't get the words, but ask about the meaning. No, she's got to be, what? So her first response is, you don't even have a BA, much less a master's. You can't even read the damn text. So how could you understand the meaning? So you see where she's stuck. That the words themselves, instead of being signifiers or pointing, are actually the meaning. And this is very easy to happen if you're a student or a scholar. And so the master then says, the subtle meaning, the true genuine meaning of all Buddhas, all awakened one, has nothing to do with words and language. And immediately, because that's right for her, she was amazed and had this unsticking, this release. You see? And so what he does there, he doesn't just answer the opposite. He says, here's where she's stuck. I'm going to pose it doesn't have anything to do with words and language. Bring her back to the meaning, which is the middle way, which has to do with self-cultivation of your whole person and not simply mastery of text and words. So that's just another example. Okay, I guess, I mean, I could go on with this, and you probably won't be that interested in, so I'll pause here. I think you got enough sense of examples. I mentioned the one last week, which was a very important one, where the assassin comes back and says to him, I can't understand permanence and impermanence. And the Sixth Patriarch says, impermanence is the Buddha nature and all conditioned things are permanent. And it's a totally opposite answer of what everything teaches. And then he gets unstuck because the master then turns away his thoughts of these and renders it in a different way to open up his mind. So that's another example. So anyway, the point of this is, and I'll share a verse with you from the Avatamsaka Sutra. And the point of why I want to share the Avatamsaka Sutra is I find over the years, as I go more closely and deeply into this text, which is basically the teachings of an illiterate, and very simple language, in many ways not very religious, the principles and the specifics of what he covers is completely supported and found in deep and profound texts like the Avatamsaka. And if you understand this text really deeply, you read the Avatamsaka, you're going, duh, of course. And if you read the Avatamsaka and you read this text, you go, how wondrous to express it so simply. But they're not two, they're one. So here's a verse. I was just, on Friday mornings, my Monday through Thursday is not the Pure Land. And so by Friday morning, I'm ready for something, and it's either Shakespeare or the Avatamsaka. So this morning was the Avatamsaka, because even Shakespeare couldn't shake me. And this verse came out of the Avatamsaka, and this is from the verse is called Praises in the Tushita Heaven. So it's a particular chapter, and I think it illustrates what I was trying to point to tonight. And it's really quite, and this is a verse, 4 lines. All Buddhas have no Dharma. Does that get your attention? All Buddhas have no Dharma. What? That's the first line. And then the next line is, so what is there to say? This is beautiful. All Buddhas have no Dharma, so what is there to say? Now the next line is very interesting, is matching or following, matching their thoughts to the thoughts of others, matching their words, their insights or thoughts, their dispositions, to the thoughts of others, following according with the thoughts of others, then it says they proclaim the Dharma in this way. In other words, they bring up a Dharma when they have none, because they're according with and responding to the thoughts of others. And this is really, I love this, it's because it's explaining that to be a Buddha is to reach the mind that's not attached, clinging to anything, beyond even needing medicine anymore, because there's no setting up and no knots. So how could they have a Dharma? Well, what they have is an uninhibited, unattached, unbound, liberated awareness. And so then, because of the compassion, when the thoughts, emotions, feelings of a living being come in front of them, they match with those and then proclaim Dharma. In other words, give a countervailing thing that's based on that request. And so when they meet living beings who are afflicted uptight, they don't say, "Oh God, you're a mess. Oh, I pity you." They simply go, and they counter with something that attends to that. They don't even have the reaction of good or bad. They don't even have that such like, "Well, I think you're a little easy, I'll work on you because you're a mess, really." They don't even go there. They just like, here's the knot, and and the Dharma arises, and then they don't cling to that Dharma and say, "Okay, here's Dharma A or Dharma B." They just go on until the next situation. If no living beings and no situations, they're fine. There's no Dharma. It's not like they're writing books on Dharma. It's like, finally I have some time to write down the Dharma. They're not like that. They don't have to do that. It's completely following the natures and thoughts of living beings. So I just wanted to share that tonight. And then maybe, to end, I'll share some of my own from sort of encounters with my teacher. I once remember going to him, and this I think is in the spirit of this, and I said, "I have so many attachments and so many karmic obstacles that are just piled, they're weighing me down. How can I put them down?" I asked him. And his answer was, "How did you pick them up?" Now, you see, there I was stuck, and I was like, "Oh, poor me, I got such heavy karma and obstacles." And I was looking for him to say, no, let's cast them off and, do this ceremony and whatnot. And he says, "How did you pick them up?" Like, oh. Meaning, where did they come from? Oh. So that's one. The one I really like is... the little Shami who was in the monastery. And of course, because we were coming out of a sort of liberated Western tradition with very few rules to no rules, we were enlightened anarchists. And so when we came into Go Mountain Monastery, you had rules. Now you might find this shocking, as there are rules here. There are, I never noticed. Yeah, you hang around, you notice. So there's 5 rules, called the 5 precepts, and then there's 8 rules, and then you can have 10, which is the novice precepts. You can have 10 major and 48 minor, which are the bodhisattva precepts. You can get 250, 348, and you're saying, wait a minute. As you get more advanced, you get more rules. What's going on here? And of course, what that means is the 5 are the very basic, but if you really start to refine them, you realize that it's not just breaking rules with your body, but you break them with your words and language. So then you get a few more rules to control your mouth. And then the rules of the mind, wow, then you get lots of rules. But it's actually a refining of, rather than punishment because you're getting better, we'll give you more rules. And so in any event, I told you the story, but it's really good. So we're there, and in the evening lecture, and the master says, so everybody's trying here to regulate their cravings and whatnot. That's why we eat at certain times and just don't run over the place and snack and whatnot. So there's a meal time, we have a meal offering, and the reason we do that is because the food is given to us by donors, and we're given a thanksgiving and so on and so forth. So we have the ritual before the meal, and then we have a closing after the meal, and the young novices there is like, it's too much crap. I just want to eat when I want to eat. You know, I just want to go in there, and especially when good things come in, if I don't get them first, somebody else is going to get them, so I want to get into that bag first. And he says, why do we have to go to bed at a certain time? You know, and all this. And so finally the master says, any questions? And he does it in such a way as like, he's been sitting in the back just vibrating to ask this question. Yeah, why are there so many rules? So here again you have, what's the method? Somebody brings up one thing, you bring in the opposite and might, you know, produce this. So the master's response to all your thinking, he says, because you're so unruly. And it was like, whoa, wait a minute. And he's like, oh. And he paused. He's like, the rules, there's so many rules because I'm so unruly. So the converse might be true. And because I talked to him afterwards, he says, does that mean if I wasn't unruly, there wouldn't be rules? And I says, I think that's what it was implying. And he started to think, because at his moment this is prohibitive, you know, punitive rules that are being laid upon me, restricting me. Why is this, and who are you to lay them down, was basically where he's going with this, anti-authority. And the master just turned it back and said, if you had mastery over yourself, there wouldn't be any rules. And so, you know, in a sense you say, where did that come from? Remember this line in the text, this verse, he said, when the mind is made straight, why toil following the rules? It's right from the Sixth Patriarch. And it's almost like, okay, so the rules only exist because there's unruly mind. When unruly mind is taken care of, there are no rules, and now you're back to the middle way again. So it's just like, there's so many ways we could illustrate this, but I just want to do a few tonight to unpack this, because often we read this passage, people think it's formulaic or there's some kind of thing that magic about doing this, but if you really get to the deep spirit, you realize it's an endlessly creative art to be able to respond. And one of the things I feel that I felt that has to happen, and when I do it okay, it's because I'm closer to this, and when it's not, it's because I'm further away. I have to have no agenda. I can't come with a sense of I got it and you don't, or I'm smarter or better than you, or I'm a cultivator and you're not, or I'm trying to impress you. Anything like that will just mess up your thoughts and the thoughts of others. In other words, making them match. So it has to be really clean and artless. There can't be the slightest condescension or, you know, idea of judgmentalism or anything applied to it. It has to be just totally open responsiveness. And then you get closer to it working. And you can't try. That's the other thing. And even if it works in one situation, usually for me it was like an hour, 2 hours, 2 days, a week later, I should have said. I could have said. I might have said, but I didn't say. But then when the next situation comes up, if I go to I could have, should have, might have, and bring that one up, it's no longer relevant either. So it's like, that's why I think in the Patriarch Sutra he says, if you got it, it's like right in the midst of battle and the swinging of swords, you know where to deliver it. And if you don't, you have to, you know, ruminate and think, and it's already past the point. You're already, you know, blindsided. So the question is, and how do you get to the point that you can respond in this way? That's my question that I would pose to the Sixth Patriarch, is I understand what you're saying and I see the subtlety of this. What do I need to change in myself to be able to exercise this Dharma practice of complementary pairing, which is I'm still thinking about. Anyhow, that's it for tonight. We'll pick up again next week. Are there some announcements? Mm-hmm.
So tomorrow, as usual, we have in the evening 7:30 p.m. the lecture, Avatamsaka lecture by Rebbe Hengscher. And the next week, November 6th, will be the special event, actually celebration of October 6th. Yes, October 6th. Celebration of birthday of Master Hui, the teacher what Marty mentioned. And it's gonna happen in main San Francisco library in from 1:30 p.m. to 5 p.m. So many distinguished guests are coming for this event, some from China, very important abbots, our friends from monastery, Thai Forest Monastery, Abhayagiri, and many, many different others friends. So this opportunity to celebrate together and remember the teacher, the founder of this monastery, and the whole organization, the Dharma and Buddhist Association. So highly recommended this. And what else? More information you can find on our website, berkeleybuddhistmonastery.org. And yeah, that's it.
Any other announcements? When's the next session coming up? Anybody know? Either here at the City of 10,000 Buddhas? Isn't there usually a Guanyin in the fall? Just so you kind of maybe think in advance a little bit. No matter how much you think in advance, as soon as you make up your mind to do it, resistance will arise. But if you let it arise early, you might be able to rub it a bit. So,
I think it's November
Ken,
20th.
do you know the dates?
October 20th to 28th.
October 20th to the 28th? Okay, so that's a Guanyin recitation session, that 7 days that takes place at the city. And these sessions are really good in the sense that they allow you to pull out of kind of habituated daily doings and shift your focus completely into a 7-day immersion type experience. And that in itself, the very stopping of the ordinary to immerse in something like this, can actually have, regardless of what it's for, whether it's Amitabha, Guanyin, or Chan, the very fact of the stopping itself can open up possibilities that don't happen when we're filled up with habituation and cell phones. Hey, Connie, cell phones. Yeah, thank you. The eyes. We have eyes but do not see, we have ears but do not hear. Okay, let's do the transference in English.
Hearts of goodness.